2. Alright, we're back with Leibniz's Monadology reading group with just 2 people, that's fine. And we're going to read the one we left off at. Well, we actually read this one, the last one, but we're going to reread it just for the sake of reference because these lines kind of have a continuity to them. And we're a little bit past halfway, so this probably won't take too long, but we'll just go ahead and pick up here. Accordingly, among created things, activities and passivities are mutual, for God, comparing 2 simple substances, finds in each reasons which oblige him to adapt the other to it. And consequently, what is active in certain respects is passive from another point of view. Active in so far as what we distinctly know in it serves to explain what takes place in another, and passive in so far as the explanation of what takes place in it is to be found in that which is distinctly known in another. Now, as in the ideas of God, there is an infinite number of possible universes, and as only one of them can be actual, there must be a sufficient reason for the choice of God, which leads him to decide upon one rather than another. And this reason can be found only in the fitness or in the degrees of perfection that these worlds possess, since each possible thing has the right to aspire to existence in proportion to the amount of perfection it contains in the germ. Thus, the actual existence of the best that wisdom makes known to God is due to this, that his goodness makes him choose it, his power makes him produce it. I'm not going to stop here, because I think he'll have more stuff on universes that will
multiverse.
Yeah, that we should probably read to incorporate before we comment on that, but we'll move right along. Now, this connection or adaptation of all created things to each and of each to all means that each simple substance has relations which express all the others, and consequently that it is a perpetual living mirror of the universe. Alright, interesting. And as the same town, looked at from various sides, appears quite different, and becomes, as it were, numerous in aspects, even so, as a result of the infinite number of simple substances, it is as if there were many different universes, which, nevertheless, are nothing but aspects or perspectives of a single universe, according to the special point of view of each monad. So this is kind of an interesting take on the multiverse, but it seems like it might not actually be getting at even like an apparent multiverse, but rather that the universe might as well be plural for each monad that there is. Kind of like reconciling there being a universe for each soul, but I'm sure he would stipulate that with relativity between monads and the condition of each monad, which, I mean, he kind of talks about with, you know, how it seems like this actually ties into that. All the conditions of monads are kind of relative. Let's just move on, see if he contextualizes this. And by this means, there is obtained a great variety as possible, along with the greatest possible order. That is to say, it is the way to get as much perfection as possible. So this is kind of like my self-definition, almost like you maximize God maximizing definition, kind of like well, that's actually more like Chris Langen's CTMU, where God is maximizing utility. Besides, no hypothesis but this, which I venture to call proved, fittingly exalts the greatness of God, and this Monsieur Bayle recognized this in his dictionary, article Rorarius. He raises objections to it, in which indeed he was inclined to think that I was attributing too much to God, more than it is possible to attribute. But he was unable to give any reason which could show the impossibility of this universal harmony. according to which every substance exactly expresses all others through the relations it has with them. That's a really good line. Yeah, basically, definition and relation is one and the same. Very important line. Every substance exactly expresses all others through the relations it has with them. Further, in what I have just said, there may be seen the reasons a priori why things could not be otherwise than they are. For God, in regulating the whole, has had regard to each part, and in particular to each monad, whose nature, being to represent, nothing can confine it to the representing of only one part of things, though it is true that this representation is merely confused as regards the variety of particular things in the whole universe, and can be distinct only as regards a small part of things, namely those which are nearest or greatest in relation to each of the monads. Otherwise, I think it's a monad. Each monad would be a deity. Oh, actually, let's repeat that a little bit. Let's back up. This representation is merely confused as regards the variety of particular things in the whole universe, and can be distinct only as regards to a small part of things, namely those which are either nearest or greatest in relation to each of the monads. Otherwise, each monad would be a deity. It seems to be kind of getting at why monads, as a kind of ideal nature, do not just live off in their own universe. He doesn't really get into that being as due to their definition or their conditions being particular, as a kind of particularization of God, but I don't think that would be inconsistent with what he's saying. It is not as regards their object, but as regards the different ways in which they have knowledge of their object, that the monads are limited. In a confused way, they all strive after the infinite, the whole, but they are limited and differentiated through the degrees of their distinct perceptions. So, kind of saying that the reason monads are, monads. Confusing myself here.
Either way is fine.
Yeah. Monads are not defined by their object, but the way they know their object. So the relation between the subject and the object. So, and that's kind of where the object stems from, anyways, is what they've developed of it, the condition of the subject, which is kind of a form of self-knowledge or self-definition. Let's continue on from there. And compounds are in this respect analogous with simple substances, for all is a plenum, and thus all matter is connected together. And in the plenum, every motion has an effect upon distant bodies in proportion to their distance, so that each body not only is affected by those which are in contact with it, and in some way feels the effect of everything that happens to them, but also is immediately affected by bodies adjoining those with which it is itself in immediate contact. Wherefore it follows that this intercommunication of things extends to any distance, however great, and consequently every body feels the effect of all that takes place in the universe, so that he who sees all might read in each what is happening everywhere, and even what has happened or shall happen, observing in the present that which is far off as well in time as in place. Sympnoia panta, as Hippocrates said, but a soul can read in itself only that which is there represented distinctly. It cannot all at once unroll everything that is unfolded in it, for its complexity is infinite. Thus, although each monad creates the whole universe, it represents more distinctly the body which specially pertains to it, and of which it is the entelechy, and this body expresses the whole universe through the connection of all matter in this plenum, soul also represents the whole universe in representing this body, which belongs to it in a special way. So the body is kind of the immediate manifestation or defined manifestation of the soul. However, if you think of it, your soul does experience the entirety. It is manifested locally within the universe, and to some degree, every body or object in the universe is relative to it to greater and lesser degrees. Obviously, your immediate
Sort of
environment.
like the concentric chainmail kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing in a way.
Yeah, and really the only thing distincting it is the condition, but the condition of the
Would you say
soul.
that's sort of a part of maximizing definition?
Um, kind of, but well, okay, if you think of it like this, a soul kind of contains all definition. It definitely contains like all of the laws and like the meta structure of the universe. It contains
Right.
all defined things, but not in the same proportion.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay. Yeah.
which is why like you have everything that the universe has in your soul. Otherwise, you couldn't like manifest in the universe that you don't like
Yeah.
contain the
Yeah.
definition of, but um, but because it's definition, it can kind of actually have a gradient because it's not like ontological, but you have it in different degrees, which is why you have relativity. Some a Cambodian child, a Westerner like you or I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have as much relativity to, but we do have enough relativity in the shared definition to, be on the same world or same planet,
Right.
the same Earth. Your family members, people in your immediate environment have a greater relativity than someone in the Florida Everglades right now. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. That's a bad
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
but you get the point. Let's continue from there. The body belonging to a monad, which it's entelechy, which again kind of means I believe like ordering principle or containing. I think entelechy means like a containing principle of kind of a sort, or its soul. I might be wrong on that though. I know we did it in the last video, but this is a word I always forget. Constitutes along with the entelechy what may be called a living being, and along with the soul, what is called an animal. Now this body of living being or of an animal is always organic, for as every monad is, in its own way, a mirror of the universe, and as the universe is ruled according to a perfect order, there must also be order in that which represents it, i.e., in the perceptions of the soul. And consequently, there must be order in the body, through which the universe is represented in the soul. So, yeah, kind of a self-reference here. Monad to the universe, body to monad, or body to soul. Thus, the organic body of each living being is a kind of divine machine or natural automaton, which infinitely surpasses all artificial automata. For a machine made by the skill of man is not a machine in each of its parts. For instance, the tooth of a brass wheel has parts or fragments which for us are not artificial products, and which do not have the special characteristics of the machine, for they give no indication of the use for which the wheel was intended. But the smallest machines of nature, namely, living bodies, are still machines in their smallest parts ad infinitum. It is this that constitutes the difference between nature and art, that is to say, between the divine art and ours. So that's a really interesting point. You could zoom in on organic life, and all the parts composing organic life, even as you zoom in,
Like
are still,
cells.
yeah, cells, the parts composing cells all have their own parts that are machines in themselves, or kind of like self-moving things that you can just continue to zero in on. Whereas a machine, once you have isolated a part, it's no longer a machine. But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
pretty interesting point, which is also kind of an interesting point against. I think I've
And
used
he's
this.
he's also sort of putting out the idea that like technology, machines aren't things in themselves, but a product of something that is being humanity, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, machines certainly are kind of an extension of the human
Right.
being in the manifest world, and this would be kind of a good point, unless you could actually mimic like human. This is also self-referential, so you have, because it's organic, and that organic kind of means like real, right? Or at least a representation, a more direct, immediate representation of something real, something that is
Right.
self-moving, like a being, right? Because there's inorganic
Mm.
stuff as well, which is never a machine. Um,
Hmm.
um, when you have that, and it's kind of adhering to, not adhering to the reality. There's no failure to adhere to the reality principle, but it's extremely self-referential. Um, it's kind of hard to word, but I think people kind of understand what I'm getting at here. Yeah, self-referential. There's something more to this, though. I think I should revisit this at another time. All right.
I will too.
And the author of nature has been able to employ this divine and infinitely wonderful power of art, because each portion of matter is not only infinitely divisible, as the ancients observed, but is also actually subdivided without end, each part into further parts, of which each has some motion of its own. Otherwise, it would be impossible for each portion of matter to express the whole universe. So that kind of continues that. Whence it appears in the smallest particle of matter, there is a world of creatures, living beings, animals, teleshes, souls. Each portion of matter may be conceived as like a garden full of plants, and like a pond full of fishes, but each branch of every plant, each member of every animal, each drop of its liquid parts is also some such garden or pond. Yeah, so this is all going to be kind of getting at self-reference. So, of course, if you've been following the work I put out, you're probably familiar with self-referentiality. When you have a self-contained reality principle, i.e., there's nothing external to reality. Everything that's real is contained within a unitary reality principle. Everything in that principle will be in reference to the principle itself, which means that serves to explain, the virtualization of certain things, and even self-reference, like that basic, like fundamental self-reference, that is basically necessary, because you can't have something real without it referring to the principle from which real things are derived. But because that self-referentiality is so fundamental to the reality principle itself, it can become very layered, and you have things within reality referring to other more more fundamental things within reality. The more
Or
particular,
universal.
right? Exactly, yeah. The more particular a
Yeah.
thing is, the more universals it will refer to. There's more than one. Well, imagine there's like more and less universals. There's like a gradient of particularity. The more particular will refer to the more universal, and self-reference. This is also kind of why virtualization happens. Virtualization is like, I mean, we have pretty intimate experience with a virtuality today, which would be really interesting to, see what people like Leibniz would say about that. But it's basically a similar thing, self-reference. Let's see what else he has to say about it. And though the earth and the air, which are between the plants of the garden, or the water, which is between the fish of the pond, be neither plant nor fish, yet they also contain plants and fishes, but mostly so minute as to be imperceptible to us. Thus, there is nothing fallow, nothing sterile, nothing dead in the universe, no chaos, no confusion save in appearance, somewhat as it might appear to be in a pond at a distance, in which one would see a confused movement and, as it were, a swarming of fish in the pond, without separately distinguishing the fish themselves. Hence, it appears that each living body has a dominant entelechy, which in an animal is the soul, but the members of this living body are full of other living beings, plants, animals, each of which also has its dominant entelechy or soul. But it must not be imagined, as has been done by some who have misunderstood my thought, that each soul has a quantity or portion of matter belonging exclusively to itself or attached to it forever, and that it consequently owns other inferior living beings, which are devoted forever to its service. For all bodies are in perpetual flux like rivers, and parts are entering into them and passing out of them continually. So 2 things on this. The first is that, let me go ahead and turn off that real quick. The first thing, obviously, is talking about how bodies are not going to be static because the condition of monads will change. So, of course, the body must accord to that. Probably the more important thing is if you were to, so if you're an entelechy, that means you as a monad of your particular scale probably contain more particular monads. In fact, your body, we obviously know that human bodies contain other life in them. I'm not sure I would say that these souls that are in our body, like that of bacteria. Of course, bacteria has some kind of monad.
Subject.
Right. It's not as sophisticated. It is animated though. It's self-moving.
Right.
I wouldn't say that is something that is like contained. It kind of is in a way, but not entirely. We're kind of more like an environment, but that does necessitate some kind of relation. Of course, just like we're relative to the Earth. However, if there were souls that were kind of contained by the ones that we have at this very moment, that were in a more metaphysical way, then they wouldn't necessarily be bound to ours. They're only relative to ours insofar as, or as long as the conditions are actually relative, the conditions of the souls. Like, basically what I'm getting from this is if the soul were to, or the monad, changed its condition and it was no longer relative to its directly more universal superior, it would pass through the relation to that monad and no longer be as relative to it. That's kind of, a lot of this is just drawing out the implications of established axioms with the metaphysical system. But yeah, it's a good point. You could apply that to like if there is a multiverse or even a universe as described by Leibniz earlier, where it's kind of just this aspective thing, multi-aspective universe, which I think is probably fairly accurate. You could probably, if your condition was not compatible with one aspect of the universe. I mean, you might as well categorize it as a multiverse, because souls are ultimately one thing. Anyways, the whole thing he talked about earlier with the spectration of the universe is kind of like, how souls even came to be to begin with in a unitary system. So it might as well be like multiple world souls, but you can kind of apply this to that. You wouldn't be bound to one world soul, like doomed to it, if your condition became incompatible with it. It follows that you would certainly change your relation to it. So let's continue on, because I think he will. Yeah. Oh, actually, this is. Yeah. Well, let's just see. Thus, the soul changes its body only by degrees, little by little, so that it is never all at once deprived of all of its organs. There is often metamorphosis in animals, but never metempsychosis or transmigration of souls. Nor are their souls entirely separate from bodies, nor unembodied spirits. God alone is completely without body, so that's a great one. This is, oh, what the hell? Somebody's honking outside. That's weird. Okay. That was like an ominous one, too. Alright, okay.
An ominous honk, a ghost honk.
Yeah, it was like, it sounded like it was out of a movie. Alright. Yeah, I should be careful when I go about my business later. It's like an omen. Okay. So, this is a pretty bold statement that would definitely contradict what a lot of people in, whatever spiritual doctrine, especially monistic metaphysics, or people, familiar with Pythagoras, or Vedanta, would probably maintain, but he's saying there's no transmigration of souls, which I totally agree with, because transmigration implies a literal movement of the soul and a possession of bodies. And it kind of implies an outward movement.
Distinction. It sort of implies like your soul is separate from your body, kind of.
Yeah, it does.
To me, anyway.
Oh, certainly, yeah. Because it implies the soul's movement in the external world. It's not really getting at an internal motion. And it generally implies possession of bodies. It's just a bad metaphysic. What it does happen. So the body, and I think Leibniz here actually understands this better than a lot of other philosophers, is that the body is a manifestation of the condition of the soul. There's a manifestative phase, unmanifestative phase. When it's unmanifest, kind of like a period of rest. That's death. Same thing as sleeping, except on a more macrocosmic scale. And the soul doesn't move anywhere. It's non-local. It's like the containment for this. It contains its own activity of like manifesting its body. It contains the images. So people think of it too materialistically, in too much of a material way, where the soul would be operating on, like, the soul's operation unto itself is, this kind of material operation, but it's imaginary. So as that imaginary process kind of rests, it's not like the world is no longer there to the soul. It's or the manifest world, I should say. And he's saying that there's no souls that are separate from bodies. I'm sure he's kind of defining souls as a conditioned thing, whereas God if God maintains his unconditioned or undefined nature, even as like individuation occurs, it doesn't necessarily mean God. God can become plural without, for the same reason that multiple souls can exist without actually
Mm-hmm.
failing to maintain that undefined nature. So there's definitely a dialectic to be had with the whole ineffable, but there's still problems with it, obviously. We're not going to get into that too much right now because it's not super relevant. God is without a body because he's undefined, or he doesn't have like the same definition. He does, but that's via souls.
Mm-hmm.
Souls are never entirely separate from bodies because a soul has a condition, and a condition has definition, and definition registers as an image, or yeah, I mean, bodies or this
Well,
kind of
definition and the image are one and the same.
um, not exactly, because
Would you say so?
well, think of it like this: when you die, there is something that isn't dependent on the image, but your soul still has like that defined condition. It's just that
Okay.
that condition, it is like natural to the soul. The soul has the
Mm.
capacity, not even capacity, propensity to manifest definition as an
Mm-hmm.
object. Like
Okay.
that's like what it does. It doesn't. There's no way for it to not do that except to have like more universal conditions. The more universal condition you
Mm-hmm.
take on, the less particular your body would be. But if you have a condition at all, you'll have some form of object of that condition, because if
Mm-hmm.
there is something to be defined, it will be objectified.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, you could argue potentially that the more the more particular a condition is, the more it's subject to like manifestation dynamics, as in an integrative period and disintegrative period. I mean, obviously we get old, our bodies disintegrate, they unmanifest, then they manifest once again. And he's saying there's no unembodied spirits, which is very, very interesting, right? He's saying there's no disembodied souls or beings, um, which I am inclined to agree with, except for perhaps during a non-temporal like rest period of sorts. Kind of like we don't experience sleep. Sleep occurs within the manifest world, but we don't really experience the period where we're not dreaming in a temporal way. Uh, but when you're dead, it's principally similar, but not exactly the same. So it could certainly be that obviously no local time is passing because you don't have like a manifest locus to even facilitate that. But I don't want to get too tangential, but very interesting point here. And he says a lot. Like, this is it's a pretty loaded paragraph where he makes a lot of claims. But let's see if he substantiates it further. It continues on. Okay. It also follows from this that there is never an absolute birth, nor a complete death, in the strict sense, consisting in the separation of the soul from the body. What we call births, generations, are developments and growths, while what we call deaths are envelopments or diminutions. Or diminutions. Yeah, so this kind of reminds me of Neville Goddard, where he's kind of like he kind of puts forward that you won't even remember, like you'll kind of just incarnate in a world very similar. Well, I mean, like Leibniz said, each moment is consistent with the one that precedes it. So a consistent world, consistent with the condition of your soul, with what you previously were incarnated within. You might not even realize it. Um, which would be consistent with if there is like a period of rest at all, kind of like how there is when you sleep. If it's non-temporal, it doesn't really matter too much. You wouldn't even experience that. In fact, that might even kind of diminish the utility of putting forward something like that, but let's continue on. Philosophers have been much perplexed about the origin of forms, intellicies, or souls. But nowadays, it has become known through careful studies of plants, insects, and animals that the organic bodies of nature are never products of chaos or putrefaction, but always come from seeds in which there was undoubtedly some preformation. And it is held that not only the organic body was already there before conception, but also a soul in this body, and, in short, the animal itself, and that by means of conception this animal has merely been prepared for the great transformation involved in its becoming an animal of another kind. Something like this is indeed seen apart from birth, as when worms become flies and caterpillars become butterflies. So one thing I'm going to clarify is if anyone's kind of thinking or assuming that Leibniz is like referring to a literal material presence of the soul in the body, I would definitely temper that notion. He's probably not getting to that. Just in case anyone was thinking that, but we'll continue on. The animals, of which some are raised by means of conception to the rank of larger animals, may be called spermatic. But those among them which are not so raised, but remain in their own kind, that is, the majority, are born, multiply, and are destroyed, like the large animals. It is only a few chosen ones that pass to a greater theatre. But this is only half of the truth, and accordingly, I hold that if an animal never comes into being by natural means, no more does it come to an end by natural means, and that not only will there be no birth, but also no complete destruction or death in the strict sense. And these reasonings, made a posteriori and drawn from experience, are in perfect agreement with my principles deduced a priori as above. The Odyssey might provide a lot of context for this. I definitely will consider doing that in the future. We'll do Spinoza next, though. But thus, it may be said that not only the soul, mirror of an indestructible universe, is indestructible, but also the animal itself, though its mechanism may often perish in part, and take off, or put on an organic slough. So, I think he's kind of implying a mysterious, not transmutation, but the way in which souls kind of just continue themselves, like referred to earlier, where you probably wouldn't even realize that you've reincarnated, because I mean, we didn't in this incarnation, so it stands to reason that something similar would occur for the next. Kind of a mysterious perpetuation, where the body is shed for a new one, but perhaps a new one more in greater accordance to the soul at that point in time, after an unmanifestative period when your body's kind of been disintegrating. But a kind of a metaphysical shedding of the snakeskin. But let's continue on. These principles have given me a way of explaining naturally the union, or rather the mutual agreement, of the soul and the organic body. The soul follows its own laws, and the body likewise follows its own laws, and they agree with each other in virtue of the pre-established harmony between all substances, since they are all representations of one and the same universe. Souls act according to the laws of final causes through appetitions, ends, and means. Bodies act according to the laws of efficient causes or motions, and the two realms, that is, of efficient causes and that of final causes, are in harmony with one another. And whenever a kind of idealist, monist, or anything adjacent to that talks about harmony, I generally will assume they mean it very, very literally, to like the highest degree, not really like a symmetry. I generally take it to mean like almost containment. Descartes recognized that souls cannot impart any force to bodies because there is always the same quantity of force in matter. Nevertheless, he was of the opinion that the soul could change the direction of bodies, but that is because in his time it was not known that there is a law of nature which affirms also the conservation of the same total direction of matter. Had Descartes noticed this, he would have come upon my system of pre-established harmony. According to this system, bodies act as if, to oppose the impossible, there were no souls, and souls act as if there were no bodies, and both act as if each influenced the other. As regards minds or rational souls, though I find that what I have just said, what I have just been saying is true of all living things and animals, namely that animals and souls come into being when the world begins, and no more come to an end that the world does. Yet there is this peculiarity in rational animals, that their spermatic and animalcules, so long as they are only spermatic, have merely ordinary or sensuous souls. But when those that are chosen, so to speak, attain the human nature through an actual conception, their sensuous souls are raised to the rank of reason and to the prerogative of minds. Before I criticize the kind of soul-body dynamic he's putting forward, probably the part of this that should have been clarified the most, in fact he might in Theodicy, because I don't think he's a dualist at all on the matter. It's just not very clarified, but lack of clarity is a good criticism. We need clarity now more than ever. But I'll go on just in case he actually corrects that or elaborates that himself here. Among other differences which exist between ordinary souls and minds, some of which differences I've already noted, there is also this, that souls in general are living mirrors or images of the universe of created things, but that minds are also images of the deity or author of nature himself, capable of knowing the system of the universe and to some extent of imitating it through architectonic ensamples. So kind of
So is he referring to like minds as your physical brain?
No. He's referring to
There.
minds
Okay.
as souls that have a more rational quality to them, whereas there are souls, for instance, those of bacteria, that are basically more just sensing souls. They're just basically sensing. They're not reasoning.
I would depend that more on like condition rather than like difference in what kind of soul you have.
Yeah, I definitely would too, because I think, I don't know, I've always wanted to kind of bring a little bit of healthy opposition to this kind of Platonic tripartite division of the soul. However, it is there's definitely something to it. However, I would agree it's definitely more a thing of condition rather than any kind of principal difference. He's kind of suggesting that reasoning minds are kind of a product of a closer image to the absolute, like a more direct mapping of the soul to God, but I don't think you can really, I mean, maybe in the same way I was talking about the other day, but let's get his full thing, but I do agree that it would be more a thing of conditions. Anyways, he finishes this one with each mind being like a small divinity in its own sphere. It is this that enables spirits or minds to enter into a kind of fellowship with God and bring about that in relation to them He is not only what is an inventor is to his machine, which is the relation of God to other created things, but also what a prince is to his subjects, and indeed, what a father is to his children. Whence it is easy to conclude that the totality of all spirits must compose the city of God, that is to say, the most perfect state that is possible under the most perfect of monarchs. This city of God is truly universal monarchy, is a moral world in the natural world, and is the most exalted and most divine among the works of God. And it is in it that the glory of God really consists. For he would have no glory were not his greatness and his goodness known and admired by spirits. And it is also in relation to this divine city of God, or that God specially has goodness, while his wisdom and his power are manifested everywhere. As we have shown above, that there is perfect harmony between the two realms in nature, one of the efficient, and the other of final causes, we should here notice that another harmony between the physical realm of nature and the moral realm of grace, that is to say, between God considered as architect of the mechanism of the universe, and God considered as monarch of the divine city of spirits. As a result of this harmony is that things lead to grace by the very ways of nature, and that this globe, for instance, must be destroyed and renewed by natural means at the very same time when the government of spirits requires it for the punishment of some and the reward of others. Let's see. It may also be said that God as architect satisfies in all respects God as lawgiver, and thus that sins must bear their penalty with them through the order of nature, and even in virtue of the mechanical structure of things. And similarly, that noble actions will attain the rewards by which, on the bodily side, are mechanical, although this cannot and ought not always happen immediately. Finally, under this perfect government, no good action would be unrewarded, and no bad one unpunished, and all should issue in the well-being of the good, that is to say, of those who are not malcontents in this great state, but who trust in Providence after having done their duty, and who love and imitate, as is meet, the author of all good, finding pleasure in the contemplation of his perfections, as is the way of genuine pure love, which takes pleasure in the happiness of the beloved. This it is which leads wise and virtuous people to devote their energies to everything which appears in harmony with the presumptive or antecedent will of God, and yet makes them content with what God actually brings to pass by his secret, consequent and positive will, recognizing that if we could sufficiently understand the order of the universe, we should find that it exceeds all the desires of the wisest men, that it is impossible to make it better than it is, not only as a whole and in general, but also for ourselves in particular, if we are attached as we ought to be to the author of all, not only as to the architect and efficient cause of our being, but as to our master and to the final cause, which ought to be the whole aim of our will, and which can alone make our happiness. So, interesting stuff. I mean, this was kind of reading this, and if you're kind of familiar with what Chris Langan kind of talks about, this seems actually pretty similar to the CTMU moral framework. So I'm sure Chris is pretty inspired by Leibniz, probably more holistically. I generally prefer getting into, because all of this, basically paragraph 86 forward, or probably actually 85 or 84 forward, I don't think it's incorrect at all. I think it's probably pretty solid, actually, but it's not really relaying the hard metaphysics of it. It's a little bit rhetorical, but I think he could make a strong metaphysical argument, or maybe someone could, I would say that it's probably not like an arbitrary reason why things the way they are. And if you're kind of aiming for like an arbitrary good, that would be arbitrary. But the good shouldn't be arbitrary. The good should be what is real. And I think kind of a maximization of utility or of definition, which would contain a lot of, I guess in these words, like efficient evils or like apparent evils, that would still be necessary to maximize definition, to define reality, because it's possible, it's possible for that to occur. So and clearly it's possible because it's happened. So in order for that, and I wouldn't even say that hypotheticals are always possible, but something that has happened, evil things have happened. We'll say like subjectively evil things, that you need to have those to maximize the definition of reality. But that's not necessarily like, I guess you could make the argument, and I'm sure Leibniz is kind of making this argument, that those things, the maximization of the definition of reality and its operation, will lead to a greater good than, foregoing that. And that's just like an ontological good. That's a good that takes precedence over like, any human's arbitrary notions of good, right? And that it's ultimately could be in our own best interests. If it's in the best interests of our highest self, it would, stands to reason that it's also in our best interests. So yeah, this is pretty similar to Chris Langen's utility in some ways, especially with the malcontents. Chris kind of talks about how Chris actually takes this further, where, the malcontents, so to speak, would kind of just be discarded for their lack of utility. I actually do not subscribe to any kind of oblivion of the soul at all. I don't think that morals are arbitrary or should be arbitrary. If there's a moral thing, should be very absolute and not according to human arbitration. And that's because I kind of did move on past this, so let's see. We've been going for a little less than an hour, but I will comment a little bit before we wrap this up on some of these other things. The harmony between, I think when he clarifies efficient and final, that kind of clarifies it as not being a position on like dualism or dual realms of nature. Rather, one is of the other, obviously the efficiency of the final. So material causes me moving my mouse as I'm doing right now, clicking. The efficient cause is the movement in my body. The final, or the more final cause, is the movement in my soul. I don't think he's really distincting those, except for, I mean, there is definitely a distinction to be made there, but not like an absolute distinction. I think really what he's getting at with that and before, kind of more so to have coherency. You need to be able to make some practical distinctions, and it is useful. I do think that, let's see, the thing about souls and minds should be tempered. I think that anything that has a soul, some state of mind, is a mind, so to speak. I think if reality is ideal, or mental in any way. And indeed, he implies that God himself is mental. So then, like, what then would, or how would you derive like a non-mental state from that in monads? But then again, he kind of, I think his mind, and even he says that not all monads are souls. I think that seems to be kind of pragmatic. He almost tiers them as, a monad would be like a unitary, immaterial, self-moving system that is kind of an ideal nature, or like ultimately of an ideal nature, of a less sophisticated condition. Soul would be a more animated, progression. Oh, I don't want to say progression, but condition like that. And then mind would be those who achieved, rationality, like animals think. I'm sure anything that is animated has some form of thinking. It would be useful to have a system that kind of can forthrightly tell you why humans and even animals, they have some capacity to reason. There's some pretty smart animals as well, like why we have the capacity to, as souls, engage in a more sophisticated mental activity. I would forthrightly put forth, like, not that I'm unamenable to a different position on this, but I would say that this is because we've developed that condition from a more basic mental condition that would have been more primitive. But I think it's primary, but I don't think it's and the capacity to reason is always there. I think our capacity to reason is a progression of a more basic reactive. Well, no, I don't think active reasoning, like deliberate reasoning, like we're doing right now, it is almost fundamentally different from reactive. Like when he's talking about sensible souls, like let's say bacteria or animals are more sensitive than they are deliberate, right? That's kind of them just being reactive to their own conditions. It's like almost like an ignorant engagement in their own condition, and then they're reacting to it most of the time. Although, you know, animals, obviously like mammals and a lot of birds and whatnot, pretty intelligent. They can be deliberate. I think deliberation is something that kind of souls have learned to grasp, and humans are even vary to the degree to which we're deliberate. And we're very, very reactive. So I would say something along those lines would be a little bit more accurate than we uniquely inherited the reasoning of God, although we could be expressing that potential condition more, and obviously we are, because we literally are. But whether that I don't think that was necessarily like pre-mapped to the extent that Leibniz is implying. But all in all, I think Leibniz is a great, like just an excellent. And this is a short text. I encourage anyone who listens to this, like, go read it on your own. Read the other things Leibniz wrote. I haven't yet, but I will. I'll probably do them in this reading group. I'm assuming at least a couple dozen people will see this. If you want to join the reading group, we're going to do Spinoza next. We probably will do Theodicy, another text by Leibniz. And as you can see, much of this is citing Theodicy, so that should be interesting. Really, really good author. Really good stuff. Positions you don't see too much in like the ancients, and it seems to often just be better systemized, a little bit more consistent and coherent than a lot of the ancients. But yeah, do you have any closing thoughts?
Not particularly. Besides, I didn't expect him to be this good.
Yeah, neither
Leibniz
did
is
I when I
actually
first.
better than I thought.
Yeah, neither did I when I first read him, but really good stuff.
And
Thanks.
it's also interesting to see the clear similarity between him and Langen, or the influence that Langen took from him.
Yeah,
Well,
very
not
true.
took, but
Yeah, oh
there's
yeah,
certainly like a little bit of convergence there. But
definitely. Yeah, I'm
it's
sure some of
interesting to
it
see
was
that.
kind of a unique convergence. That happens
Mm,
quite frequently. I had a little bit of unique
mm.
convergence with Leibniz, but it is I don't blame Langen for being influenced by Leibniz.
No,
Not
no.
a lot of people like directly are to the degree that Langen is, and it's definitely interesting to see. And Leibniz is definitely very worthwhile. This is like a 15-page text. It's pretty short. Um, really good stuff.
We got it done in like 2 hours.
Yeah, 2 hours with a long
With
commentary.
discussion.
Yeah,
So
so I encourage everyone to check it out on their own. I have an article uh, with further commentary on the monadology. I think it would be a little bit excessive to just go read through that, but if you're interested, you can check out my blog, roguetheologue.com. And yeah, thanks for listening. We will see you guys in the next piece of content and the